anyone who joins us live. Thank you, Arlene, for coming in and giving us this great talk. And I'm Ann Vogel, the owner of Dragon Tail Books. So I'll let you take it away about your book.
Thank you. The book, They Refuse to Fight, is historical fiction. The characters are real, and the story comes from facts about the Ebel family, intertwined with fiction. In the 1800s, Catherine the Great, the leader of Russia, but of German descent, invited Germans to Russia to farm. The Russian farming was antiquated, and she thought Germans could show Russian farmers how to produce better and be more productive. She gave many incentives to lure the Germans to her new country, such as religious freedom, free from being in the military, being able to self-govern their communities. All they had to do was survive the journey. The trip was life-changing for the Ebel boys, but they made it. They were assigned a colony based on their religion. So each colony was like Catholic, Protestant, Mennonite, Jewish. And each person was given 60 acres of land where they built their lives, found love, had families, and prospered. Until Russia had a revolution and the country became a battleground. The German communities became pawns in the Tsar's attempt to pit his people against each other in order to save himself from the newly formed communist unions. He was switching the blame from himself to the Germans or the Jews as to why the Russian people were poor. So I'm going to read a few pages from the beginning of the book.
Could you tell us a little your name and
I'm sorry.
Like a little bit about you?
My name is Arlene Eslinger. I grew up in Minnesota. I've lived in Wisconsin most of my life. The Ebel family is my family. This is my great-great-grandfather that we're talking about, who left Germany and went to Russia. 3 generations lived in Russia, and then they had to flee for their lives. Okay,
Thank you.
so I'm going to read just a few pages from the beginning of the book. The year is 1846. Das stood in the doorway of his small barn, arms folded across his chest, watching his sons wrestle in the dirt. He was distracted by his thoughts. Today is their last day to be children, their last day of being safe with their family. Today is my last day to be their da. Tomorrow they will be gone. They will be alone, and I can't be there. Da, shouted his youngest boy. Watch William, Da. He's getting so strong. He almost pinned me. Da looked to his 16-year-old son. William was sweating, a look of determination and will to overcome his little brother. His teeth clenched, his arms and legs flailing, trying with all his might to get on top of Roshan. Da knew the slim, lanky boy didn't stand a chance against his younger brother. Roshan was built like his mother, low to the ground, wide and strong as a bull. Good boy, William, Da called out, trying to sound enthusiastic. You almost got him, son. Keep trying. Da's heart was heavy as he watched them. His eyes were glassy with unshed tears. 14-year-old Roshan was enjoying the wrestling match. There was no effort on his part, no concentration or thinking needed. They were sitting at the table having a conversation. William wasn't speaking at all. He was grunting and snarling, using all the strength he had to fight his way out from under his little brother. Roshan tried to speak softly so Dad wouldn't overhear him. He still had questions he wanted to talk about, but his voice was like his body, big and strong. Dad turned his back to give the boys privacy, but stayed where he was and listened to them talk. William, what do you think it's going to be like? I wonder how long. Listen to them talk. William, what do you think it's going to be like? I wonder how long it's going to take us to get there. How much money do you think we would have to make to pay for the whole family to come live with us? Do you think I can pass for 16? It was obvious to Dad that Roshan had not fully grasped the situation. He closed his eyes and shook his head. Dear God, he is too young to go. The one-sided conversation continued. Are you scared, William? It's just going to be you and me, isn't it? What if we get lost? Dad said we have to pretend we are older than we are in order to apply for land in the new country. I don't like lying. I'm not good at it. Ma can always tell if I am hiding something. She can even tell if I'm thinking about lying. What if I say the wrong thing? I'm going to miss Ma and Dad. How will they get along without us? What's going to happen to our family? What, what's going to happen to us? Roshan stopped, laid still on top of William, looking down into the intelligent brown eyes of his brother. Roshan lowered his mouth to William's ear and whispered, William, I'm a little scared. William stopped trying to get the upper hand and looked at his brother. A little boy, really. Too young to be brave. This isn't fair, William said, not talking about the fact he was laying on the ground under his brother and couldn't move. I don't want to go either, but we have to. Ma and Dad need us to go. Saving our lives is the most important thing to them. It will be hard for them without us, but William shook his head to Roshan. It would be harder if we stay. Gently, as if he hadn't said this to his brother 1,000 times already. We have no chance of a future if we stay. You know this. We have been over it 1,000 times. Da had argued with William for months. He knew his oldest son struggled over the idea of leaving his family. William knew he had to leave, but thought he should go alone. Roshan was still a child. Wouldn't have to worry about being drafted for a couple more years. Maybe things would change in a couple of years and the German chancellor would stop the draft. Da said to William, we can't depend on maybe. 3 years in the army, even 3 minutes goes against the teachings of our faith. Da was lucky to own a small farm where they could grow their own food. In other parts of Germany, people were starving. Boys were conscripted into the army instead of staying home and helping their families. Frederick William III was forcing young German boys into service. Even though this Kaiser had decreased the number of years they served from 5 to 3, stopped renting out soldiers to other countries. Da and his Mennonite community would not allow their boys to serve, not for one day. Da stood in the barn's doorway trying to come to terms with losing his 2 sons forever. His stomach was in his throat, his chest hurt, his eyes burned. He walked to the house to check on his wife and other children. Inside their small house, Ma was sewing money into their boys' clothes. The house smelled of fresh bread as she packed food for their journey. Her face was scrunched up as if she was crying, but her eyes were dry. There were no more tears left to cry. Ma looked exhausted. She was slightly bent, every step slow. 3 little sisters watched their mother, listened to her keening. They knew something was terribly wrong, but had not been told that tomorrow they would see their brothers for the last time. They clung to each other, eyes big with fear and worry, silently waiting for their mama to call them into her big, strong arms. Tomorrow morning, 2 young boys will start walking from Frankfurt to Ulm, 180 miles. They have to somehow get on a Zillen that floats from Ulm to Vienna. From there, a barge will float them down the Danube, 1,075 miles. Da and Ma had discussed the dangers and challenges the boys would face traveling alone, and said that in Germany the boys would be forced into the army. Refusing to fight would result in prison or a firing squad. If they travel to Russia alone, they still may die, but at least their souls would be saved. The Bible was very clear. The Mennonite elders taught everyone from birth that there was no exception. You never raise a hand against another, even if it means your own death. Da and Ma talked long and hard about the whole family leaving Germany. In the end, they couldn't take 3 little girls on a dangerous trip. Letters from Russia said most children didn't survive the trip down the Danube. Da listened to Ma pray. Her prayers had no beginning or end. She talked to Jesus all day, sometimes all night. Bless my beloved children. Keep them in your loving arms until we can see them again. She would not lay eyes on her sons again until they met in heaven. Guide them. May they remain good, God-fearing men. Help them on their road to everlasting life. Since Da and Ma made the decision to send the boys to Russia, wherever Ma went, whatever she did, the mantra continued. At times she would thank God for her children for allowing her to raise them. The prayer would always end the same. Save them, bless them, keep them safe. Tomorrow was the day chosen for the boys to leave. For the past month, as the day approached, the grief and pain of separation got almost heavier than the parents could bear. Mom and Dad vowed to each other that they would not change their minds. No matter how hard it became, they have to leave. Dad tried to fill their heads with all the information fathers took a lifetime to share. He didn't know how much they could remember, but he talked about farming, caring for the land, planting, harvesting, selling crops, making grain. He showed them how to choose and care for animals, how to heal them or slaughter them, how to dry and smoke the meat. They were given instruction from the carpenters in the commune on building a house, furniture, sheds, wagons, and outhouses. Ma taught them to speak like other Germans and not the biblical way. When the boys said thee instead of you, she would give them a sharp smack on the head. She made them work with her in the kitchen, teaching them how to prepare food. And they were leaving in the morning. What had they forgotten? Tonight, Dad would talk until his voice was gone, giving them one more opportunity to ask questions. He wanted to make sure they had memorized all the things it would take to survive, not just on the trip, but for the rest of their lives. Tomorrow, the weight of what he had done would weigh on him until the day he died. An inconsolable wife would add to his grief. Our little girls would be lost without their big brothers. They will have endless questions about where they are, when they will come home. Praying will be our language every minute of every day. In the morning, after a sleepless night for everyone, a mother gave her boys a lifetime of kisses as their faces were washed in their mother's tears. A father placed his hands on his boys' heads and gave them a final blessing. Heavenly Father, keep these young men safe from harm. May they always be your servants and do your will. Look after them always until we meet again. Then he broke. His shoulders shook. The loss overwhelmed him. The boys could barely move their feet, their desire to remain with their family so great. But with a shove from their father, they headed to the door. William quietly told his mom he loved her and would write as soon as he could. He hugged his dad, kissed his sisters, and walked out the door. Roshan was bawling, sobs rendering him unable to say a word. He hugged his mother so tight her ribs cracked. She had to push his arms down. He couldn't seem to let go of her on his own. He squeezed his little sisters until they cried out. It was impossible for Dad to say goodbye to Roshan. They stared at each other's face and hair, shoulders and hands, ears and feet, trying to engrave the picture in their minds. With eyes so big and scared, the boy clung to his dad for the last time. William waited outside for his brother, but when Roshan couldn't leave his family on his own, William had to go back in and take his little brother by the hand and pull him along. As if speaking to a little child, William said, "Come on now, we have to get going. It's going to be all right." As they walked, Roshan cried loud, wailing sobs interspersed with, "Mama, Mama, I want my dad. I don't want to go." William kept a good grip on Roshan's hand as he walked away. He feared if he let go, Roshan would turn around and run for home. If Roshan went back, there would be no way to get him to leave again. The family lost their ability to stand, and both parents dropped to their knees, clutching each other and their remaining children, hearing their little boys' cries long after the boys were out of sight. And so began their trip. And it changed them. It changed who they were. But they made it, and then they began their lives in a country that was completely barren and one that they had to figure out how to live. So that's the rest of the book.
So how many years does it span from 1848 through?
From 1846 until my grandfather left for the United States in 1906. And the story continues until his family joined him, and then a little bit into the United States as well. So, what do you want to know? Let's see.
So did they set out with some money, but how did they, because I'm guessing they needed lumber or did they have to make logs?
Well, they did, but Russia gave them a little bit to start. They gave them some lumber, some tools, some animals, and land. So most people didn't make it. Most people died because they took the government's handouts too quickly. And really, the boys, when they got there, they had to find work. They had to find a place to make money so that they could take the time to till the land and get the land ready for crops. And so they waited to get that property from the Russian government.
So they each got
60 acres.
Okay.
Plus, the way they had their communities set up is that there was a town where each person had a farmyard in town, right next to each other. So each farmyard had their barns, their house, and they actually the barn was connected to the house. And so they had like 2.7 acres for their property. And then right next to it was another property. And that's how the town was built. The land that they tilled was outside of town. And the farmers would go together in wagons to work the farm land.
So was it a communal then? They all joined?
Yep. That's the only way they could.
And so did people come in to create and sell like general stores or things
Yes,
after they?
yes, they built a community. And when the boys got there, they were assigned a community, which it was already in existence. So it was still primitive, but it was further along because I believe Catherine the Great had started this process maybe even up to 100 years prior. No, not quite that long. Maybe 50 years prior to them coming there. So
And so she was thinking, we just need more food or
yeah,
people.
the farming techniques that the Russians had was very primitive. And the German people had gotten way ahead as far as their techniques, their tools, the things that they needed to till the land. So they were much more advanced than the Russian people. And that she was from Germany, she had a sense about what German farmers could do for her.
And so where they were is now.
It's 20 miles south of Odessa in the Ukraine. Yeah. So that particular community turned out to be not Mennonite. So that was another challenge that they had to deal with.
Okay, so they were in a Jewish.
They were Mennonites in Germany.
Okay.
And then when they got to Russia, they were assigned to a Protestant community, which was different for them, but they made it work.
So did they convert or did they keep?
Hard to say how much they kept.
Okay.
I imagine they had to blend in if they wanted to find work, if they wanted to be part of this community.
But then in 1906, they wanted to move everyone.
In 1906, by 1906, the Germans from Russia, is what they're called, were being eliminated. So they were either run or die.
So it didn't matter what religion.
At that point, they were eliminating the Jews and the Germans. So, and it was easy because the Russian people felt that the aristocracy had given away their land. So they weren't happy with either of those people. And the Jewish people, of course, they were unhappy with them because they blamed them for getting ahead and for owning banks and for controlling grain elevators. And so they just assumed that if these two groups were out of here, then we could prosper. But unfortunately, what they didn't remember is that prior to those people coming to Russia, nobody was prospering.
And so 3 generations.
So the majority of the book is taken up with my great-grandfather, who is William's son. And so his life is probably more prevalent than his father's or my grandfather's.
Okay. So William's son.
So William, and then George, and then my grandfather was John.
Well, that's interesting. And so they were able to thrive, like when they had children
Oh, they prospered. They prospered. At one point, the czar in charge called them my little Russians. I mean, they were given everything because they were wealthy. And, you know, they used the Germans, they called them serfs, but really it was kind of slavery. I mean, they didn't pay them, they just gave them a place to live, and you know, they used them.
So did they get extra land, or did they?
Eventually, they would buy from more land, or they, you know, people didn't make it or wanted to leave, and then they would buy more, and, just like it is today.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And so what else struck you about the story, or that you found, you know, interesting and you incorporated into?
Well, if you go to Germans from Russia, you will find so much information about this community of people. And when they came to the United States, there were some that moved to South Dakota, North Dakota, some that moved to Kansas, and some that moved to Texas that I know of. Big, large numbers of Germans from Russia. And so they have different organizations, like in North Dakota at the university, there is a large library on Germans from Russia. And you can buy books, pamphlets. There's just such a large amount of information. They have conventions every year. So it's quite a big organization. And so I tapped into that. And then I tapped into, what's it called? Well, I can't think of the name of it. I think it was the Historical Society from Russia, and then Ancestors.com. And from Ancestors.com, I got ship rosters, so I knew who came, when they came. I got the census from, I think it's 1930, so I know where everybody went from when they came here. So there was a lot of information. Of course, my family had lists of people, and then on the internet, you could just look them up and find out where they went and who they married and what their kids' names were. On and on. But, so,
And you started with that research first.
well, I started because my Uncle Donnie had written a little book for his children called So You Would Know. And he talked about his life in South Dakota. Because my grandfather came over and farmed in South Dakota. They brought wheat from Russia. Winter wheat was introduced to the United States through the Germans from Russia. And at one time, in the area where my grandfather lived, was the biggest wheat capital of the United States. And that all started because people were sneaking over wheat.
Can't do that now.
No, for sure. But anyway, it started with that book, and then my wanting to know more. So I just started researching. Was at it a long time because it was very enjoyable, and so many stories, so many books that I read. And it just started coming together as a book. And probably took me 2 or 3 years to put it together. Once I had it together, I contacted a concept editor out of New York, and she helped me put it into an organized book and told me how to make it better. So then I did a complete rewrite on that. And then I did a line item editor, which took a long time. And then I hired somebody to do a book design, which is quite an ordeal as well. And so between that, then pretty soon it was ready to be published.
Grab one. So, or you have to come here. There you go. Yeah, and so I'm sorry, my geography is terrible, but Estonia, is that, or was that before Ukraine? Because I know Germans went to Estonia as well, which I think is part of that.
there were like 1 million Germans in Russia. So in the back of my book, there is a history. And so I kind of go through the history as to, for instance, it talks about between 1765 and 1824, there was 100,000 Germans that went to Russia. So, I mean, that was just the beginning.
So they never got citizenship. So they were always
I don't think
Germans in Russia.
They just wanted to live as Germans. They didn't change their language until they were forced to. They didn't go into the service until they were forced to. The serfs were finally freed so that they had to start paying them. And so that didn't happen until they were forced to do so. Eventually the Russians brought in their own teachers to teach their children. They took away their Bibles. They took away their religion and made them go to the Greek Orthodox Church. Everybody had to go to that. Everybody was taken away from their religions. The Catholics, the Baptists, the Mennonites, the Jews. They were all expected to go to the Russian Orthodox Church. So their freedoms were taken little by little. And eventually they wanted to eliminate them. And they did ship them to Siberia. And, they froze to death on the way. So it's a lot of tragedy that happened once the Russians made that decision to get rid of them. And actually, the people that survived in Siberia were not allowed to leave until 1972. But anyway, over the years, of course, they multiplied and became a great community. But there's none left.
So they tried, so they kept their culture and everything and language. And then, But so some didn't get the free land. They were kind of on someone else's land, or were they considered?
They came for the land, but a lot of people were not farmers, So maybe they sold their land to other people and built a store, or became blacksmiths, or a veterinarian, or all the other things that you need to have a community.
So they weren't working others' land. They actually owned it.
Yes, yes. And it wasn't, this was not considered the Ukraine. It was Russia. I don't know when exactly the name Ukraine came about. But they renamed all the towns, all the communities, and there's no evidence of it there in Russia now. No.
It's interesting. It's an interesting concept. I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah. I don't think that many people realized that there was this huge number of people from another country that lived in Russia for so many, many years.
I would have thought they would have kind of assimilated them quicker, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're coming, now you're Russian, or you're
Yeah, but that was the draw. They could stay the way they were, and that was the draw.
No, keep going. Quiet for the moment when I come in and see what's going on.
I don't know what
we
else.
need questions.
Oh, we need questions. I already been asked the same questions that have already been asked. So, what's the time frame of the story?
Between 1846 and probably, let's see, my grandfather came to America in 1906. His family came in 1908. There's just a little bit more that's told after that as far as how their lives went after they got.
What part of Germany were they in before they left in the Frankfurt area? Okay. And who was in charge then of the Frankfurt area at that time? Was it like a little kingdom or?
Yeah, it was what is he called? A chancellor?
Right.
Frederick. What was his name?
Or was he the Kaiser?
It was a Kaiser.
So the emperor.
I don't know, is a Kaiser and an emperor the same thing? I don't
Yeah, it is.
We've been
Kaiser's-
watching.
Kaiser's German for emperor,
know. Okay.
yeah.
Because like Catherine the Great was in the royalty of Germany.
Right.
She was sent to Russia. There was some talk that maybe the Russian aristocracy had become too inbred.
Right.
And so they needed outside blood. So she came, and then somehow she overthrew her husband and became in
Right.
charge.
Was she a Habsburg, right? Weren't they the ones
Yeah.
who took over everywhere?
I don't know who it was.
Yeah, and they're related very loosely to the English royal.
Right.
I
Queen
remember.
Victoria or something.
Catherine was, yeah.
Mm.
I'm not certain how that all worked out. They're all cousins.
Or
right?
Nicholas was the king's wife or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I even had
Like-
watched an old movie about, I can't even remember who was starring in it, but it was about Catherine the Great and how she overthrew her husband.
Right.
And then he was such a lunatic that they never even consummated the marriage. She ended up having children with somebody else.
Mm.
So when you think about that,
Hope to get the book off the shelf about Catherine the Great.
so if that's true, then you got to think that the Russian aristocracy stopped right there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but I don't know. It was an old black and white movie on like Turner Classic Movies. You know, and I thought, what?
Well, what motivated them to go to Russia rather than say United States?
Because Catherine the Great had given them
Mm.
incentives.
Oh, I see.
Basically, well, this Kaiser had been taking the young boys out of the country and renting them out to like England.
Oh.
Actually, they said there were 30,000 German boys sent from Germany to England, to the United States, to fight the war against George Washington.
Mhm.
Oh, so
Right, yeah.
So way back
the
early,
Hessian-
early.
Hessians,
Okay.
Yes.
yeah.
So my family was Mennonite, so they were not going to allow their boys to be enlisted in the service because that would have gone against their beliefs.
So was the conscription mandatory? And was there a war going on in that?
There was not a war at that time.
Okay.
There was not.
They really didn't need.
They didn't. And they were starving. I mean, that was before the Industrial Revolution. So people were not doing well.
Mhm.
So for him to take the young boys away and put him into an army was just suicide.
I've been waiting for someone to come.
Yeah, and there might have been threats from other countries or, you know, at that time. I don't really know.
What kind of research did you do to fill up this book? I mean, obviously you know the basic outline of the story. It's been passed down through the generations, but
Yeah.
you fill it in far more than just, you know, family legend or
Oh,
what's
absolutely.
written in the Bible. How did you research it?
Well, I went through the Germans from Russia Historical Society in North Dakota,
Really?
and they have an extensive library. And you can buy, I don't know, I think I've got some in here. They've got hundreds of these. They're North Dakota, Germans from Russia Historical Society.
Mhm.
And each one of these books will give you stories from other people on their family. It will tell you what they ate, and there's maps in here to show you, you know, where everything was and where they were. So, and a lot of people use this to connect family members to others in their community. They show you how to kill a pig. And, you know, and some of the old recipes like blood sausage and,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a heritage of different families. And so, you know, just got a ton of these.
So that museum, like, did oral histories with folks that came, you know, or
Yeah, well, yeah. Each one would send in Here's a story about down the Danube to Odessa. That's a really good one.
Mhm.
And it talked about how many days it would take to get down the Danube. Well, now it's all locks and dams,
Right.
but in those days it was treacherous.
Mhm.
So rapid.
Yeah, what kind of boats how did they describe it? Like how many people were on these boats?
Let's see. I think I know that. Well, I think I have a picture in the book somewhere.
And how did they
This is a
escape?
picture of the boat.
Okay. That's pretty big.
That one's a pretty big one. That was the one that went down the Danube. But to get to Vienna, this is the boat they floated down. It looks like a raft, which is what it is. And so they went on that raft to Vienna, and then when they got to Vienna, they put them on barges, and that was all paid for by Russia to get these people to come.
Wow.
And they carried 309 people, and that was in 5 different barges. So the boats were pretty small.
So how did they get back out?
The boats were disassembled when they got to Vienna.
So like in 1906 when you're
How did they get out?
yeah, because if they were coming to get them.
Well, sometimes, there were some pogroms that were going on at the same time. And so these were, they were killing Jews by the thousands. And there were some major pogroms at that time. And so they were anxious. They were becoming an embarrassment on the world stage. The rest of the world was going, what? What are you doing? 20,000 people are dead because of these programs that they put together. So there were times when they were just trying to get people out, ship them out, get them out of here. So, especially after one of those pogroms where a large number of people were killed, then the world would start looking at Russia and saying, wait a minute, stop that, And so then they would, all of a sudden, they'd start hauling people out on ships left and right just to get them out of there. So that's how my grandfather managed to get out, because it was right after one of the worst killings that they had.
So he went.
He ran right with them, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Because they were getting to that point where they were doing the same to the Germans. The Russian people were so angry. They had caused such a conflict between the Germans and the Russians that the Germans weren't safe anymore. The Russians were attacking them. They were trying to take over their land. They were trying to steal from them, and so it was a battleground. The whole country was in a battle. That's when the Union started forming.
So did you track down the other brother, Roshan's?
I did not.
No.
I did not.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Do not know
where they ended up, or
No. I don't have any evidence that he came to the United States. He might have.
or what children, or
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that book would have been.
really thick. Track both families.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I tried to stay with one story, so yeah. If I had gone with Roshan's family, it would have kind of split the book, and then it would have been, it's confusing enough because people named, like my great grandmother Barbara, then she had a Barbara, and then there was another Barbara. I mean, it gets confusing enough because they use the same names over and over again, So that would have been very confusing if I had started a story about a whole new family.
Especially at the same age. Yeah.
Yeah.
so do you have plans for another book, or?
Keep researching it
Yeah.
and do the other family.
I don't think I'll do that,
Yeah.
but there's always a writer's a writer,
Mhm.
so there might be.
Would it be another historical fiction, do you think, or change?
No, I don't think I'd go with a historical fiction again because of the amount of research that it would take. So, I mean, I've started a lot of books, so, you know, I'll just go back and find one of those to re-up.
Well, obviously this is your own family that you're telling me about, but what inspired you to write about them and say not one of your other book ideas? I mean, a lot of people are interested in genealogy to the extent of what country did I come from,
Right.
and then after that, they care less, right?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to research that, especially if you're European descent in some nations. So they would quit and say, I don't care anymore. So what inspired you though to actually go beyond, telling your American story, but actually telling your pre-American story and how you got
Well, it started with my uncle writing a small book for his family. And so it just kind of blossomed from there and looking up cousins I didn't know I had. And, and then I went on Ancestry.com and I could find out when they came to the United States and who was there. There appeared to be some people that I didn't know, and I couldn't figure out how they ended up in this family and where did they go. So a story started about what could have been the reason why they're here and who that was, because I couldn't find them. So there came the fiction.
Sure. So you've long been interested in genealogy, it sounds like? Or?
It sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah.
I do have, I could do the same thing with my mother's side of the family. My grandfather came from Sweden. And so, I could write a story about that family as well. I've got enough info.
So was the fictional, so did you know all the names?
I did not.
The way back, like William.
No, actually, I was starting out with, I knew my great-grandfather's name. And when I started the story, I thought, well, maybe I'll make up some names here for his parents. But then once I saw the rosters coming from from the ship, so when they left, they went from Russia to Germany and then from Germany to the United States. And so I could see who was on that boat. And so then when I started looking for his brothers and sisters, then that brought me back to a common denominator with a William and an Elizabeth. And I was going to name them. I thought her name would be Emma, but it turned out it was really Elizabeth. But then it started, once you start looking at lists and you go, oh, here's George and he's got John. Well, then here's a brother. And, so then I could go back to his mom and dad. So kind of had to go backwards and start over again.
So you had that name and then some other names, and so do you know exactly where they were, or just where?
Yeah.
Because that was in the.
Yeah. They went to a town called Worms, Worms, and that's where they began their journey, and then they had to move to a different town. So I had to come up with, why in the heck would they have to leave? Fiction. But they did end up in another town, which the name changed, to Freudenthal, which, that's not there anymore either. But I do have maps with that name on it. Mm-hmm.
So you had that information, and then you had kind of the broader research of what Catherine the Great was doing, and then kind of the details.
Yeah. I read a lot about the history of Russia and why they decided to change their demographics. There was a lot of stories there that were unsettling, such as when World War II happened and the Germans invaded Russia. The Germans from Russia thought, great, we're saved, you know. But then the German army started killing off the Jewish people that they ran into in Russia. And the Germans that lived there couldn't abide that. So now they had no side. The Russians didn't want them and the Germans didn't want them. So they ran. And there was a lot of them that ran to Poland. And they were in Poland at the end of World War II. Part of the negotiations when they were divvying up the spoils was Russia said to America and Britain, we want those Germans back from Poland. And so they had to gather them all up, send them back to Russia. We put them on a train to Siberia, and most of them were dead by the time they got there. That's a terrible story. And America was part of that. I didn't like that.
How do you balance the history and the fiction so that it's not like a history book, but more of a story?
I want it to be a story.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of having these people, and you know they're here. Okay, so for instance, before my great grandfather was born, he was the youngest of the family, and so how did that happen? There was a baby in there that didn't make it, so that's a story. You know? And William coming to Russia as a young boy, and how did he find a wife? What was she like? And you know, so it's just asking questions about. You know, I had the demographics, I had the people, but how could that possibly have happened? That's fiction.
Right.
So they were 18 and 16?
16 and 14.
16 and 14.
Very young.
Yeah. So when did he get married? How
I
old
think
were they?
he was about. He was about 18, 19.
He had to be established.
Yeah, so he was very, very young when he married. So that's a story about meeting his wife. He was going to marry an 18-year-old kid. Maybe somebody older. Somebody who was desperate for a husband.
So was it mostly young people that came, or did they have
No,
all
I don't
ages?
think so.
They
I think
moved in?
Germany was at a point where they were financially struggling. So people were leaving to have a better life. It wasn't just about avoiding the draft. It was survival.
Well, it was beautifully written. But you read, so thank you, yeah.
Absolutely. No.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for
Thank you for
coming.
coming in.
Yeah.
Telling us the
appreciate it.
story.
Yeah.
And letting us record it so we can